Hey guys, welcome back to another video in the garden today. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how we emptied this garden. It is now ready for winter. Everything has been pulled. There's a little bit of greenery that you'll see is stuff that I decided to leave and see if they overwinter. So come along and see how we take it all out and how we get this ready for winter. So let's get right into it. I actually did record most of this video yesterday, but I did find footage from 7 weeks ago when I took my break. And one of the days that I was out here, I actually did bring you guys along. So you'll see what the garden looked like 7 weeks ago, the end of September, and what it's looking like now in the middle of November. Quite a big contrast that happened over the 7 weeks. And you'll see the first parts of putting this garden to bed and how we finish it off. I hope you enjoy. So like I said before, this first part of the video will be from 7 weeks ago, the footage that I found. So the first thing that I did here was that I removed the cucumber vines. You can see that that was the first thing to dry out in the garden, was the first thing to go. So once we harvested all the cucumbers, I just cut the bottoms of the plants and I started pulling out the vines. And for the cucumbers, it was pretty easy to do it. It wasn't very dense, all the greenery, the vines weren't too dense, especially the other side of the arch where it was in one of the new garden beds that didn't produce the best. It was pretty sparse, so it was easy to pull out. Now, knowing what I know, because I did the green beans off camera, that was very tough, and when I did the loofah, wow, that one was really, really tough. Wow, I'm gonna have to do just one next year. I won't be able to plant 2 or 3 vines per arch. The next thing I did was I came around and I cut the broccoli. You can see that they're flowering. I also did remove zucchini plants. I removed squash and watermelon vines, and I actually harvested a bunch of things off camera because at this point I still had peppers and I still had eggplant and tomatoes and lots of good stuff coming in. And the last thing we did on this day was remove a bunch of flowers. Now I did come back into the garden with friends on a different day and with family on a different day, and I removed a bunch of other stuff. So this is what my garden is looking like on the last cleanup day of the garden. So I am going to pull the last few plants. You can see that so many of them have dried out. Even though it's not fully winter yet, we've had quite a few really cold days. We've had a lot of windy days, which wind doesn't really affect us. But quite a few cold days, especially nights, where it got really cold. And like the temperatures got really low and everything froze. So I am removing the tomato plants, and I'm thinking this back row, I removed tomato, any basil plants that were left, and marigolds that were left in these beds. Now to remove all these plants, all I do is I take my snippers, or what are they called actually? It's called a lopper. So I'm using my lopper to cut at the base of the plant. And with the tomatoes, because they're attached with a string to our trellis system, I tried cutting it first with a lopper, but it didn't work. So I ran into the house, I got a pair of scissors, and after I cut the base of the plant, I cut off the string at whatever point the plant was reached up to, and that's where I cut it, and I pulled the plant, and I left everything on the walkways, and I'm still gonna have to come back and do a cleanup of that later on. And as you can see, some of these plants still have vegetables on them. Like the eggplant still has one on it, Tomatoes, there was still some on it, but they've all frozen, so they're not really edible anymore. So I have to get rid of it together with the plant. The next thing I'm doing is that I'm pulling out my planter that I'm going to be using for my 2026 garden, which if you've seen the video where I planted the garlic, then you saw how I sketched that out. So I'm going around in the beds with my ruler, measuring where I'm leaving plants. So when I plan out the garden, where I want to place things for next year, so I know what to order, what seeds I need. I know the spaces that I'm working with, because if these things die back, then I can fill it up later because I always have extra plants. But if they survive, I don't want to put something else there or have something planned to go there. So I am marking where everything is so that I save that space for next year's garden. And here you can see what it's looking like. I have the garlic in 2 beds, and I marked where I have my celery and parsley and rosemary. And now we're moving on to our next tomato bed, which is, again, it has some basil plants still. It has a bunch of tomatoes and marigolds. Now my plan for tomatoes next year is I'm not going to be using both of these trellises for tomatoes. I will probably be using just one. So my plan is the bed where you can see the sunflowers are in there right now. In there, I want to do my hoop coop, so like the cabbage and the kale and the broccoli and those things will go under there, so I can add a 4th arch. On that 4th arch, I want to do cherry tomatoes. I want to do tomato cages for Roma tomatoes or paste tomatoes, the ones that I would can up. And I would leave just a few of these trellises for heirloom tomatoes, so the big juicy slicing tomatoes. So over here I took a little bit of a break. I ran inside because I had something in the oven that had to be taken out. So I went inside, I defrosted for a little bit, and then I came back out and I continued on with all of these plants in this bed. Now, because I still had a lot of plants in some of these beds, when we filled it up with the organic compost that we had bulk ordered, it wasn't spread out everywhere. Now, I still have some more in my backyard that I can backfill if I get to it. Still now in the fall, early winter, I might do it. If not, it'll wait till the spring. Another thing that I did here is you can see that I'm just getting all the tomatoes out of the bed. So many of them dropped either because they were frostbitten or the chickens were pecking at it, or the plant just couldn't hold it up because it was so dry, or whatever the reason was. A lot of them just fell to the ground. Now, I don't know if the seeds in there are viable. Like if I leave it in the garden bed over the winter, if they'll decompose, like if the tomato will decompose and the seeds would then grow. But I don't want to risk it. I already struggled this past spring, with tomatoes sprouting everywhere, which luckily I had managed to get rid of all those except for 2 which were in the walkways, and I decided to leave. I want to minimize that, so I'm pulling all of the tomatoes out of the beds the most possible. And now we are moving on to the loofah trellis. So first thing I'm doing is I am harvesting the loofahs, whatever I can reach, whatever I can get. Some of them are on top and I can only get them as I am pulling the vines. And I got way more than I expected. I have them inside now. I have to process them. I have to see if any of them are viable enough, like dry enough to use as a sponge. If they're not, I'm gonna give them to the chickens. If they are like spongy inside, they might still be quite wet, so I'll have to dry them out. And there's a way of doing that in the oven instead of letting them dry out on the plants. But once I got most of the loofahs harvested, the ones that I want to keep at least, I am starting to remove the vines. So what I'm doing is, some of them, like they self, what is it called? When they root themselves out, like just in the middle of the vine, if they touch the ground, they can self-root. So I'm trying to cut off most of those, but I did find some later on that I had to do. But yeah, and then I just start pulling. I just take a vine and I pull, and this was so tough because the vine split, and so it went two different directions, but then it also intertwined with other vines, and it intertwined with the wires of the trellis, and this was so tough to pull out, and it was so dense that next year I have to remember to just plant one. Just plant one loofah vine and see what it gets me, because this was just way too much for the cleanup. Harvest wise, I know that it's not accurate like most of the things in the garden this year. Harvest wasn't accurate because, if you're not aware, I had 3 beds from 2024, and this year for 2025 I added 6 more beds. The soil in those 6 beds were not the best quality, and I was not the best about fertilizing. So the beds did not produce as much or as well as they could have. My fault. I did my best. But we didn't enjoy a lot fresh. I didn't get to preserve. It's fine. So yeah, the vines did not do what they could have done. And we'll try it again next year and see what happens. Just one vine. After pulling and yanking and cutting and doing everything that I could to get rid of these vines, the highest up that I could, I climbed on the beds, inside the arch, outside the arch. Once I just couldn't do more is when I grabbed my ladder and I had to stand up on there and continue pulling the rest of the vines. I harvested the rest of the loofahs, whatever there was to still on top, which wasn't a lot. And some of these loofahs were quite soft, so those I just threw to the chickens. They kept on wanting to peck at the loofahs that I harvested, so I just gave them the ones that I knew that I don't need. And some of them, just as I was harvesting them, especially from the ladder, and I threw them down onto the garden bed, they split and they were too soft. I gave those to the chickens as well, and they really enjoyed it. And wow, look at that mess on my sweater. I washed it already, and I still have some of that on the sweater. I don't know how I'll get it off. And just like before, I'm going around and with my planner and marking where I'm leaving plants. So in the beds over here that I'm showing, I left dill, I left celery, and I left cilantro. So I'm marking those off. I am also going around to all the beds as I am emptying it. And the sprinkler heads, they are either on the ground, like on the walkways. So I am picking it up and putting them into the garden bed, sticking them in place. Or some of them were actually buried under the new layer of compost. So I'm pulling those out and just taking them into the top instead of being buried. Now, some of them, I think like 3, maybe 4 of them, the screw top came off. So I do have additional sprinklers here in the house. So I might just have to replace them in the spring. I will be mindful when cleaning up the walkways to, if I see anything, to pick it up and put it onto the sprinkler heads. But if I don't find them, again, I have some in my house, some leftover from when these were installed, and I'll just have to remove them from those sprinkler heads and put it onto some that are in the garden beds. Now over here I also pulled out 2 tomato plants that were in the walkway that were volunteer plants. So volunteer means that it's not ones that I planted, they are ones that came up from seeds from last year. So this can happen with, let's say, I didn't grow this, but I know a lot of people that grow potatoes have that happening because it's sometimes very hard to dig up all of the potatoes. So if any of them stay in the ground, they can sprout the next year. But these were tomato plants that self-seeded themselves, They were actually in the walkway, not even in the bed, so that's why I had decided to leave them. They did produce some fruits for us, nothing crazy, but I had left them, just like with the other tomato plants, to see what we could still get, and now it was time to remove it all. As you saw, I also went around and collected some pots that I had laying around that had herbs and stuff like that, but they were mostly dry and done at this point, so I just spilled all of it and I'm going to start fresh next year. Now we're moving on to our final 3 beds, which these were pretty much empty at this point. So all I'm doing is I am harvesting the sunflower heads that are left. Now these, when I came out here and harvested 2 other sunflowers, these were not completely ready yet. So I had left them, and at this point they are completely dry and they are ready to be harvested. So I am removing the heads and then removing the stalk. The easiest way to do this, I found, especially with these thick stalks of sunflowers, is that I start cutting through the stalk at the bottom and then I snap it. Now this did leave some of the stalk still there, which from my experience last year, they did not fully compost in place, like they didn't fully disintegrate. So at that point, like in the spring when I'm ready to plant, I can pull it up and then bury it so it can continue breaking down under the soil. But at this point, I didn't want to pull up the entire root system and destroy all that fresh soil that I have there. Is it the right choice? I'm not sure, but this is what I did. So I had 2 of these big sunflower heads that I removed, and I had 1 little sunflower that had popped up a couple months ago, so it didn't come to full size, and I removed that as well because it's done. And look at the chicken, so excited about the sunflower, thinking that it's for her. I'm sorry, it's not for you. I took it out and I put it away so that they couldn't reach it. Now in the flower bed, I only had cosmos left and sage. The cosmos, the chickens loved sitting under it, so that's why we had left it till this point. But now it has completely frozen over and the chickens have enjoyed eating all of the leaves off of it. So that was easy to remove, just like the tomatoes, cut it at the base and that's it. The sage I did harvest and I brought it inside. We're going to enjoy that. For the peppers that we still had left, so most of them were frozen over, as you can see, nothing left on it, no life on it. Some of them still have peppers on them, so I harvested any of the peppers that had any color on them and I put them inside. We'll see if I make anything with it, because like if I would love to make a hot sauce, but I wonder what the color would look like if they're mostly orange and yellow. I had maybe 1 or 2 red ones in there, but I did go around and harvest them. I used one of my pots that I had collected as a harvest basket, and again I cut them at the base. And these I didn't want to leave on the garden beds because, just like the tomatoes, if any of the seeds in the peppers are viable, I wouldn't want them to pop up there because I might not want it there. Now my plans for the peppers next year is I want to do snacking peppers. I want to do more bell peppers. And I want to do a bunch of spicy peppers, but more limited types, but more plants of each type. This year I just had like 1 or 2 of different varieties because I wanted to try a bunch of them and see what we like. I think at this point we know which ones the flavors that we like, and we can limit that, and we'll see how they do. Now, like I said before, the harvest that I got this year will be different next year, hopefully. So for preservation purposes, I do not have a complete picture of what I would get, but at least I boiled down varieties a little bit more than I did know before the 2025 garden. So I will be more picky with what I choose to plant for the 2026 garden. So guys, this is it for today. Thank you so much for coming along with me in the garden and helping me with this garden cleanup. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time.